Hi everyone, this is Eric Brown, and I'm here with critically acclaimed chef Carolyn Johnson of both Mooncusser Fish House and 80 Thoreau. And we're actually at Mooncusser, and we're having a conversation about what's going on in the industry, and we'll talk about her career. So to get started, I'd love to learn more about you and just how you got started cooking.
Yeah, so way back when. I started cooking right out of college. So I actually have a degree in economics from Wellesley, but knew that wasn't a direction I wanted to go with my life. So I found someone who would let me into their kitchen, being very green, and got a job making salads. And sort of the rest is history.
During school?
No, this is after I graduated.
Okay.
So yeah, I was put that chapter behind and was ready to swing full force into restaurants. So I was living in California at the time and found like I said, a job making salads. I worked my way up the line. I was lead cook within 9 months, and really wasn't a great restaurant, but it was a great experience as far as really diving in and learning the line and learning how to work with my fellow cooks. And so moved back to Boston in the late 90s and got a job working at Salamander's chef Stan Frankenthaler, which was a really amazing intro to the fine dining scene for me, and a really great sort of stepping off point as far as working in restaurants with chefs who really cared about sustainability and farm to table. And I mean, this was way before that was on the tip of everyone's tongue.
Sure.
And Panera's trying to say they're farm to table and whatever
Sure,
else.
yeah.
It really was. And so having farmers and mushroom foragers and all the rest walking in the back door was certainly an eye-opening experience, and not something that was necessarily happening all across the country at that point. So that was really amazing. Worked my way up the line there. I worked at Icarus in the South End. Very similar style, different cuisine, but similar, philosophies about food. So it really cemented me as far as how I felt about cooking and working with ingredients, and what was important to me as far as that went, as far as taking it from there. And then I worked up at Arrows in Maine for a season, which was really amazing. Really phenomenal restaurant. On-site garden. Again, this is this was 2001, so that was still not what everyone was doing all over the place at that point.
Sure.
They'd been doing it for a long time up there. And then was really fortunate to get in at Rialto after that. So I worked for Jody for 7 years. Made my way from saute cook to chef de cuisine, and ran her kitchen there for about 5 years of that 7. So.
And you were there part of there was like a transition, sort of rebranding, if you will. Or
Yeah, so Jody bought out her partners in the restaurant, so we reconcepted it. So it had been very sort of pan-Mediterranean, and she really embraced the fully Italian sensibility, which was more true to what she was feeling cuisine-wise at that point. And we sort of decorated, for lack of a better word, but really, sort of turned the menu, did a more Italian style with antipastis and pastas and segundis, and that was a really amazing experience to be really a part of that whole transition, and working so closely for her.
Yeah.
She obviously is a huge mentor for me.
And so, did you grow up with the tradition of food in your family, or did you just walk by a kitchen door one day and say, "That's what I want to do"?
I think it was more like, if I want to eat good food, I better learn how to cook it.
Okay.
We didn't have amazing culinary experiences growing up.
Sure.
My mom had her way with ground beef.
Yeah.
But I always loved eating, and definitely as a kid with a raging sweet tooth, I was like, I'm gonna learn how to bake, I better learn how to make cookies and brownies and all that stuff. So that was definitely where I got my toes wet first, and then just loved, I always loved watching the cooking shows on TV. I'd fight with my brother and sister, they'd want to watch, wrestling or cartoons, and I'm like, no. It's frugal gourmet. I'm the oldest, I win.
Fair enough, those are the rules.
Yeah. But yeah, I was always just fascinated with food, and just sort of was always drawn to it. So.
And so how did you make the decision to go, I'll say, savory versus pastry side?
It just sort of became a more, I mean, my personality was just much more suited to it. I was baking pumpkin bread a couple days ago, and I was like, oh, I really understand why this is not. I was like covered head to toe in pumpkin. I'm just like, I'm not enjoying this right now. It did come out really well, but I was just like, yeah, this is not weighing stuff. And,
fair enough.
Not my sort of personality meshing with that. But.
And so, like you said, you worked your way up. So there wasn't any culinary school in this picture. You went from going to Wellesley to working the line in several different restaurants, chef de cuisine, and then becoming chef in your own restaurant, right?
Yeah. So after Rialto, I took some time off, and it was really important to me to find. I knew my next step was to be a chef, and it was really important to me to find a really good fit for me. At that point, the economy had just tanked, and so it was a really interesting time to be searching for a job. The kind of restaurants that were being opened were a lot of like gastropubs were kind of really trending at that moment. So a lot more sort of upscale bar food was kind of the theme, and I was like, I don't know, it's not really what, it's not where my background is. It's not really what I feel passionate about. So I was really lucky when I found Ian and Vincent opening 80th Row, and it's like, okay, they actually want to do like, it still wasn't fine dining, but it was
definitely
certainly a step above, certainly a step above gastropub. And they were looking for, someone to, really make really high quality food, but at, a slightly lower price point than fine dining.
Sure.
And so, the fact that it was in Concord, I was like, well, that's
different.
Not exactly what I was looking for, but for me, it's going to be more important to find the kitchen and restaurant, and that's going to be a good fit for me than, maybe it's not in Boston. So, it's turned out to be an amazing partnership, and, here we are in our second restaurant. So
that's amazing. So, how did that evolve? Like, you're already working crazy hours, I'm sure. You're dealing with running a restaurant, and you say, hey, let's do this again.
Yeah, well, part of what's been really great for me working with Ian and Vincent is, they're really ambitious. So it's good to give you that push.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, quite a few years before we actually opened this, Ian approached me and said, I really want to open a fine dining seafood restaurant in Boston. Are you in? I said yes.
Okay.
So, at that point, he was still looking at spaces, and this all sort of evolved. What we do upstairs at Mooncusser is really where our primary concept had been. When we found this amazing space here, that's sort of evolved into all the bigger pieces of having Moon Bar, and now we have Cusser's roast beef and seafood, and that's been an evolution of itself since we opened. That was never part of the business plan. So it's been kind of a fun, and I think one of the most surprising things for me is that Moon Bar has actually been our biggest challenge. And trying to, it's like you think, oh, I've been a fine dining chef for so long. Of course I can do casual bar food.
Sure.
It's so hard.
So hard.
So hard to figure out in this neighborhood what it is that's going to bring people in. I think that was sort of one of our biggest challenges. This upstairs here in the fine dining space is very straightforward. The concept's very clear of what we're doing. And downstairs, especially without full liquor license, having a bar is really, it's pretty tricky.
Right. So. And so you said, going from Rialto to taking time off, like you knew it was time to be a chef, like that was what you wanted as your next step. Like, what clicked inside of you to say, like, okay, I'm ready to take that leap, and then what changes when you're in that position versus where you were before?
I think, I'd really taken a pretty slow quality approach to my career at that point. I'd really spent a lot of time being a line cook before I took a sous chef position at Rialto, and then raised through the ranks there. And I was doing a lot of menu work and stuff when I left Rialto, and I really felt like it was time for me to find my culinary voice. And I'd certainly shown at that point that I was very capable of running a kitchen from the management side of things, as far as staffing and food cost, and managing the day-to-day stuff. You know, that was sort of my primary responsibility for most of my time there. So, you know, the next logical step for me was to really focus on the cuisine side and you know, finding my culinary voice and meshing that with the management skills that I'd acquired at that point.
And so now that you have a second location, what are the dynamics of running 2 kitchens, or actually 3, right? Because you have 2 here.
Yeah.
So, you know, how does that work in terms of where you need to be and making sure that everything's happening and maintaining the standards that you set up, right? You can't just let the first restaurant sort of not fail, but, you know, flounder if you're not there all the time, right? So obviously something that you've built there has been instilled so that it runs smoothly when you're not there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think having a team there that I trust has been a huge piece of it. Certainly when we opened this place, I had a really great team in place there. My chef de cuisine in Concord, Mike, we hired him, I think, 6 weeks into opening 80 Thoreau, so he's been there almost since the beginning.
Wow.
So I mean, he really understands both my food and the culture that I want to have there. So I mean, that's critical. I couldn't do it without him. There's no.
And how would you describe the food and the culture there?
Well, I mean, the culture, as far as kitchen culture, I find it's really important to have people who are there because they want to work with good ingredients and they want to learn and they want to be around like people. And the team aspect of the kitchen is incredibly important to me. It's such hard work, you know.
Yes.
If you can't be a tight team, then it's so much harder.
Sure.
And we've had some people in there who are really great cooks, but aren't great team players, and it just doesn't work. You know, in the short term, it's like, oh, you're putting up beautiful food for me, but you're kind of a jerk, so this isn't really working out. And likewise, we've had some people who maybe were really green and needed a lot of training as far as the culinary side, but that's so much easier to train someone how to cook food than to not be an asshole, you know? That's kind of a really tough one.
Yeah.
And so that's really important to me, but really just people who care about what they're doing, they're going to take care of the ingredients, you know, because I mean, sourcing is one of the most critical pieces of running a good restaurant, a good kitchen, is if you're not getting in good ingredients, you're never going to be able to put something good on the plate. So, you know, having farmers walk in the back door with their beautiful produce, you know, and having, you know, I think it really helps with the prep cooks and stuff that they're actually taking these out of the farmer's hands. You know, it's not just some random delivery guy who's dropping off something, there's no connection, you know. And so it gives them more incentive, like, oh my God, this person who looks so weary just handed me these turnips and, you know, they grew them, they picked them, they brought them to me. So like, I have all this incentive to take good care of them now, to like be a steward of these ingredients. So I think that's a really key piece of it too, is getting those people who understand that, like, oh my God, you know, this beautiful turnip or pumpkin or whatever it is, you know, has been lovingly taken care of to this point where it came to my door. Now it's my job to like get it onto the plate with care of them. So.
And in your relationship, do you tell them what you want, or do they often just bring something and say, hey, I have a bag of turnips for you, like, or a box, you know?
Mostly it's an ordering kind of situation.
Yeah, okay.
So most of the farmers I work with, they will, you know, give me, you know, it's all sort of evolved over the years. You know, we used to do it by fax. That's how long I've been doing this. Get the fax with the list. Now it's typically email, sometimes text. But we'll get, you know, whether it's a list for the week or a list, you know, a day or two before the delivery of what's available that week. And then we go from there. A lot of times, though, it comes with a, hey, I have way more turnips than I can sell. Is there anything you can do with them? And it's like, yeah, I'll take an extra bushel, we'll pickle them, whatever. Sure. Or like, hey, just so you have a heads up, green beans are ending this week, but I got this other thing that's going to start, and you know, this will be coming. You know, tomatoes are slow this year. You know. Sure. But eggplant's ready. You know, that kind of. It's really important to have that rapport with the farmers as far as being able to do menu planning.
So you're not blindsided.
Exactly.
You have a communication channel.
Yeah, and you know, obviously you understand how the seasons go.
Sure.
So, you know when you need to start asking, like, hey, how much longer are we going to have this, or when's this coming, or, you know, so. But yeah, there's, especially in Concord, because there's so many farms out there, you know, every year somebody shows up on the door, like, hey, will you buy these tomatoes? Hey, I found this hen of the woods. Yeah. I have a pig, do you want it?
So is there a difference between running kitchen in Concord versus Boston? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there is. I'm just curious how you perceive that.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a big piece of it, actually
Yeah.
being out there where the food's being grown.
Mm-hmm.
There is a little bit of food being grown in Boston, but
Mm-hmm.
not much. But that's a big piece of it for sure. Like, you know, and having, you know, the farms kind of come and go a little bit. Every year we sort of lose one, gain one.
But farmers markets, are they a big part of what you do here in Boston, or do you
Not
still
the
have the
markets,
relationships?
it's still
Yeah.
a lot of the farmers we use that I've had relationships with since Rialto and before then.
Got it.
You know, most of them will deliver. Some of them will drop it in Concord and we'll have to bring it here.
Oh, I
and
see.
then there's some other there's some new relationships I've made since coming back to Boston now.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great guy who sort of aggregates a lot of stuff from Western Mass and then brings it into Boston to chefs, which is really nice for the farmers out there. They don't have to make the trips, and it sort of opens up another really great agricultural richness that comes to our door.
Sure.
So
you touched upon two things, sustainability and culture, and through your career progression, I'm sure you've also touched upon many other issues and changes that are going on in the industry right now, right? So it's not all just let's create a beautiful menu and everyone's going to come and enjoy the food. There's a lot that goes into running a fine dining establishment and staffing and, you know, just issues on the team and building that right team and culture so that everything that comes out on the plate essentially is flawless and meets customers' expectations, right? And they don't necessarily, the fact that they don't know what goes into all that and what you've had to deal with is testament to like your success, right?
Yeah.
So can you speak to some of those lesser known things that you've either observed or things that you focus on in building your team so that you can actually produce the food that you produce?
Yeah, it is sort of funny. And in Concord we have a chef's counter, so a lot of times they have a lot of opportunity to talk to the guests there. And it's sort of funny to me sometimes when they're like, oh, well, you know, what time do you guys get here? You know, they think, you know, well, we work at night, we probably get there at 4 or 5 or something. It's like, no, people start getting here at 6 o'clock in the morning to eat this dinner, you know? It's like, you realize it takes many hours. Have you ever cooked for 150 people before? You know?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I think that's an interesting, you know, from us talking about how the guest doesn't really understand how the things get on the plate. I mean, I think that's a big piece of it. It's like, oh yeah, no, there's people that come during the day and they bake the bread and they wash the vegetables, and then, you know, sometimes those same people are cooking your dinner too.
Right.
But, you know, there's several shifts of people that are coming in and out, and, you know, then there's the dishwashers and everyone else, all the pieces of the puzzle and how many people are involved in getting the food on the plate.
Sure.
But yeah, it's definitely been very different as far as building the teams in Concord and Boston. I think it's a combination of timing as well. I think that the current climate in Boston is very challenging, and it's very different than it was when I was working in the city in Cambridge.
So in what sense?
I think there's two major factors. The availability of staff is very different. There's so many restaurants and so many restaurant seats and so many cooks' jobs that there's not a big enough labor force to fill it all, which was not the case previously. And so that's a pretty huge challenge. So what's happening is, you know, where it's getting filled in is with pretty low quality candidates. So it's a challenge. You know, somewhere, you know, when I was working at Rialto, you know, we're getting all the top tier candidates, you know, that would apply there. You know, I remember days when you could be like, oh, I have 3 or 4 candidates for this position I have open. I get to pick the best one who's going to be the best fit here. You know?
Sure.
And now it's like, well, I think they could maybe do the job. So it's much harder to build a culture when you're not necessarily, you don't have the luxury of being able to choose the candidates. You know, you're sort of at the mercy of who walks in the door.
And do they, I mean, literally walk in the door and start cooking and you see, hope that it works, cross your fingers, or do you try to like get someone to do a trail with you and see how it works for a day or two and say, okay, here's a position?
Yeah, we always try to have people do a
Yeah.
trail or a stage.
Yeah.
I think it's super important to get a feel for,
Sure.
you know, are you gonna, you know, and I think one of the challenges we have here too is, you know, we're looking to the immigrant community very heavily in Boston. So my chef de cuisine here doesn't speak much Spanish. So, you know, figuring out how communication works, because I'm not here all the time. I know I can get by in Spanish most of the time.
That's okay.
And our sous chef when we opened was actually fluent in Spanish, so that was a huge help too. So that's been a, you know, can we figure out communication with this person, you know, and do they have the skill set, and, you know, are the hours they can work, you know, going to work for us? You know, that's another piece of it. You know, my sort of way I've organized kitchens for most of my career and the places I've worked, you come in, you prep your whole station, you know, you take responsibility for all your mise en place. So, you know, you get there at whatever time, you know, usually more like 1 or 2 in the afternoon at the latest to be able to do that before dinner service. So, you know, currently in Boston, we're working with a lot more people who have 2 jobs. So they work one job from, you know, 7 to 3 or 8 to 3, and then they go to their next job that's like 3 or 3:30 to, you know, 11. So trying to figure out, okay, well, does that mean I need to do that prep? You know, is it going to be the same experience? They don't take the same sort of ownership in the case if they're not doing their own prep for the station. You know, and that's a really big thing as far as the culture. You know, as people who are taking ownership for their dishes and taking ownership for their mise en place. To me, that's really important as far as having people really understand what's going on the plate and taking pride in it. And, you know, I think it really shows in the finished product.
Sure.
When I touched every piece of this plate, you know, it's not just like, oh yeah, I don't have any more of that. It's like, okay, but it's like 4:45.
Right.
Like, it takes 2 hours to make. So, you know, for me, it's been much harder to get the culture that I'm used to having in the kitchen here in Boston. You know, and part of it is the sort of natural turnover you have when you open a new place. You know, we're still less than a year and a half old here. You know, and, you know, what happens is, like, the few people we have held on to are really, really great. And so there's sort of a few pillars, and then we're still trying to fill in all the other pieces of getting, okay, we got this great person.
Sure.
No, they're going to help us build this next great person. And that's a pretty key piece.
And sustainability, like how that comes at a cost, a huge price tag for sure, right? So how do you manage that? I mean, it's nice to say that you want to do it, but the reality is, like, without the experience and knowledge that someone like yourself has, like, how do you actually execute on that?
Yeah, it's. I mean, for me, it has to do with my culinary training going back to, you know, my first line cooking jobs. You know, it's like that was just what the chefs were doing. So for me, you know, it's such a natural part of being a chef and doing your sourcing. It's like that's what you do. But it is more expensive to use. You know, whether it's local, whether it's, you know. I mean, and here, obviously, we're in a seafood restaurant. Sustainability has a whole different ball of wax, you know. And I mean, we could talk for hours about seafood sustainability.
And I'd love to, but I know you have a lot to do.
You know, and that's a huge piece of trying to figure out, okay, well, where is it? You know, is wild catch? That's not sustainable. But that's what, you know, I feel connected to as a chef. You know, it's like farmed. Aquaculture is so far behind land farming of livestock. You know, and for whatever reason, I mean, there are a lot of reasons of why we have this disconnect. It's like, well, it's okay to farm animals, but it's not okay to farm fish, you know. But is that true? No, probably not. You know, I think really we've eaten most of the wild fish. Like, we have to figure something out. You know, we have to figure out how to farm fish in a responsible way. And there are people who are really working on that, and it really has to do with, like, how you're feeding them and how you're caging them and how you're making sure they're not getting in with the wild populations, and how much environmental degradation you're doing to the spot, you know, which, you know, certainly land farming is, like, horrifyingly detrimental to the environment, but, you know, we just let that, you know, people don't get as fired up about it, I feel like, as they do about aquaculture.
Yeah, right, I feel like it's gotten maybe because early days it's gotten a bad rap that it hasn't been able to recover from. Whereas, like you said, land agriculture, maybe people just like their steaks too much.
Go to those like pools of pig waste in North Carolina, and and tell me that's not, you know, that's better than what we're doing in the oceans at some of the
Sure.
responsible fish farms, you
Mhm.
know. You know, so I think there is an interesting disconnect, but it's true. I think there's such a bad rap, and that's sort of in people's head. Oh, farm fish, and it's like, okay, well, like almost every piece of salmon everyone's eating is farmed these days.
Right.
There's so little wild salmon served, and we eat so much salmon in this country.
Mhm.
You know, so obviously people are just like having a disconnect, but it is really important to know the practices of the farming, and I certainly apply that to my, you know, at 80 Thoreau, we use obviously a lot of meat and poultry there.
Sure.
You know, and working with purveyors who I know are sourcing it responsibly. You know, and we do use some local meat when we can. Our
Mhm.
price point makes it tricky, and our sort of kitchen setup makes it tricky to use a lot of whole animals. But we do it when we can. And there are some really great people raising chickens, rabbits, and goats and all that kind of stuff in
Right.
the Concord area. So
Mhm.
it's fun to get those in when we can. But you know, working with purveyors who I know are sourcing, you know, getting, you know, no antibiotics and sort of responsible small farm stewardship kind of stuff is definitely important. So try to apply the same thing here. And,
Sure.
you know, use the underutilized fish when we can. You know,
Right.
we have like whole scup on the menu here. We use a lot of skate wing. We use perch.
Interesting.
You know, I think that's a really big piece of it is getting the consumers, you know, and mostly here people are pretty open to, you know, like, oh, scup, I've never heard of it, but
Right.
I'll give it a shot.
Sure.
Especially since, you know, it has a little lower price tag than the halibut. You know?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And you had talked about, so the hours themselves, right? People coming in really early in the morning to prep for dinner service. That has to attract a certain type of individual in that, I mean, those hours it's just a hard job in itself, right?
Mhm.
So, one, like, what is the type of person that is drawn to working in the culinary career that you've seen in terms of being successful? Because I think a lot of people romanticize it, and maybe they see what's on Food Network and they're
Yeah.
like, oh, I want to do that. That sounds like a lot of fun. And then
Yeah.
the reality is, I mean, it is fun. You love it, but it's also just a lot of work. And then
Yeah.
there are also just the realities of hard work and how that takes a toll on your body, your mental health, and all that other stuff that I think are now coming to the forefront of
Yeah.
articles and people are actually talking about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom forwarded me an article about that the other day.
Oh, really? Okay, when your mom's forwarding it, then it's a problem.
Yeah. That was pretty funny. A couple of her friends forwarded it to her, and she's like, "Oh, you probably know this already."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she's telling you, you sure you still want to be a chef?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's a grueling job, and I think that people do, you know, the Food Network is really, and that sort of mentality has really
Mhm.
changed, you know, I think there's a couple pieces. Kids go to culinary school and then they're like, I'm ready to be a chef. And I'm like, no, no, you're not.
Right.
Guess what? Pick some parsley. And then do dishes. You know, and you never get away from that. You know, I still pick parsley and do dishes every day.
Right.
And I think that's, you know, a big piece of people who are successful is realizing, like, you're never above the lowest rung job in the restaurant, you know, and as an owner, I'm mopping the floor every night, and that's just how it is. You do what needs to get done. You know, someone doesn't show up, you do that job.
Right.
You know, you don't have that job filled, you do that job, because there's nothing that can't get done every day.
Right.
You know, it's not like, oh, we'll just put this project off to tomorrow. It's like, no, people are coming in to have dinner tonight, so this has to get done, and everything has to get cleaned, and if there are enough hands to do it, you still have to do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, one thing we've had to do is really scale back some of our ambition here.
Okay.
And in Concord as well, just to deal with the fact we don't have enough staff. I recently did promote someone to sous chef in Concord, but we had been without a sous chef there since February, so going on 9 months.
Wow.
And we haven't had a sous chef here since April, so.
Well, what does that mean for your operation? Just, I mean, you obviously have to take up the responsibilities,
Yeah,
right?
so I mean, it really is putting a lot more onus on my chef de cuisines at the two spots. You know, they're having to basically, you know, I'm doing what I can, you know, floating between all the spaces to help with a lot of that. I mean, it's just physical prep work, whether it's butchering fish, whether it's doing the ordering, whether it's managing the staff, you know, and trying to have enough eyeballs. I mean, that's a really big piece of it, is like when you have, 2 or 3 managers in the kitchen at one time, someone's watching the prep cook, someone's watching the line cook, someone's, doing the other things, and when it's just one set of eyeballs on everything, you miss stuff.
Right.
Stuff falls through the cracks, so that's a really hard. It's hard to manage. So we've scaled back the menus at both places. We have less offerings on the menus than we have both previously or would really like to have.
Sure.
Because that's when just physically prepping less dishes is a way to balance that. And just trying to shuffle responsibilities as we can. So try to figure out different approaches of, okay, how can we don't have enough hands to do this, so what can we change about what we're doing to make it so we're not losing quality,
right?
We're not completely killing ourselves,
right?
We all do need at least 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. A nap somewhere. So yeah, that's been a big part of what my job has been over the last few months, is really figuring out, okay, like how can we maintain at least somewhere close to what we're shooting for.
Sure.
With really limited resources.
When you say, are there any other, as you look at the trends in the industry, are there any other things that you kind of worry about in terms of, or just wish other people would focus on? And
Mm-hmm.
You're focusing on sustainability and building great cultures here and putting out amazing food. There are other things that you likely focus on or are just becoming problems in the industry that you keep your eye to so that they don't become problems here, right?
Yeah, it's such an interesting, we're at this sort of crux, I think, and I think one of the big challenges that people like myself have is, we sort of came up through kitchens with this really crazy work ethic, which is fine, but it's not what the younger generation has, and I think on a certain level that's okay. What I do is not sane. And what my sort of top managers do it's not sane, it's not really healthy.
Sure.
To work the way we do, to never take a day off, to never call out sick, but that's sort of how we came up through. You don't call out sick in a restaurant, you just don't.
Right.
Do it because
there's no
no
storm
one else.
coming, doesn't matter, right?
You better be can't get 2 feet away from a toilet bowl if you're calling out sick or in the hospital. So that's been a real challenge for us. It's there was a point where we were getting up to 4 call outs a day here.
Really?
And I was just how
But the door stays open and customers come in.
Exactly. Yeah. But on the flip side, people should be able to call out sick, and people do need to take care of their sick kids, or actually take care of themselves, or that is actually something that should happen. So balancing that, it's okay, well, we need to figure out as an industry how to be a better industry for the workers, because notoriously restaurants, there's no paid time off, there's no health insurance, there's no sort of basic benefits you would get at most corporate jobs.
And I think it's really interesting that most customers probably don't realize, right? They look at the price on the menu and they're making an evaluation, whatever. They choose a plate maybe based on price or based on something else, but the value of the plate is derived from many different things, right? And part of what doesn't go into that price in the customer's head potentially is all the prep and all the stuff that goes into it, and someone paid time
silly
off,
things
right?
Dish soap is really expensive,
Right.
So many things people don't even think about.
Yeah.
I can buy a steak for $10 at the supermarket where
Right.
you're charging $45. That whole mentality where you're just oh my goodness, you have no idea.
Right. So is there an opportunity to educate the customer, or how do you bridge that gap so
I
that
think
it's not really...
What's really at the crux though too is that price on the menu isn't nearly high enough for what we're doing.
Right.
Getting into the fact that, okay, I'm paying some of the people who work here $12, $13, $14 an hour. That's not enough to live on in Boston. These people are working 2 or 3 jobs and they're still not able to make ends meet at those kind of wages. And it's not indicative of the sort of work they're doing. They're much more valuable than that. But as far as the economics of a restaurant and the price you see on the plate, and then, you know, then we could dive into the whole system of gratuity and how, you know, the guests are paying half of our staff instead of us. And,
right, sure.
And how that sort of dichotomy works, and how the front and the back of the house, you know, pay difference is, you know, egregious.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's again a whole different hours worth of subject. You know, I think that's a real problem. You know, using the high quality ingredients I use, and you know, trying to at least be somewhat fair to my staff, and then still, you know, people saying, "Oh, this food's too expensive."
Sure.
You know, and I'm like, no, it should be
not,
so much. I should be
more,
charging
right.
so much more. You know, to really, you know.
Maybe offer them chef for a day, come back
Yeah.
and work along.
Exactly. You want to see some value? You're going to value things a lot more.
Yeah. So I have two more questions just before we wrap up. And one is, I read somewhere that you actually either a hobbyist or maybe more serious in terms of brewing. Is that correct? And I'm wondering how you find the time, or maybe you don't anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I miss doing. But I earlier in my life, that was something I was very avid brewer. My husband, and I, from early in our dating life, that was something we really latched onto. And you know, we had brewing season. You don't generally brew in the summer, because it's more fun to be outside, and it really heats up your kitchen.
Sure.
Also for fermentation, it's not good for it to be 80 or 90 degrees. But yeah, brewing season, there were a couple brewing seasons we, you know, got 40 or 50 batches of beers in, you know, and we were just doing extract brewing in like 5-gallon carboys. So we never got into the big, like, we never got a kegerator or or whole grain brewing or anything, just based on sort of what our space constraints were. But definitely it's something I miss doing, and definitely a really fun hobby. I like to drink beer.
Fair enough.
So, you know, it's good.
And I guess sort of a two-part question. So if you think about the customers coming into the restaurant, or anyone looking to get into this career, like what wisdom would you want to pass on, I guess, if they were listening now? And yeah, I guess that's really it. Like,
yeah, as far as customers, I think, you know, this is starting to get touched on in Boston, is you know, supporting the small local independents. You know, Boston's really getting full of big, shiny corporate chains. You know, the Seaport's a big topic of discussion. And I think it's, on one hand, I think it's amazing what's happening in the Seaport. This was wasteland for decades, and all the time I've known Boston, you know. And like, you go down there, you're just like, wow.
Yeah.
There's like a whole new neighborhood here. How exciting. But it's full of all these like shiny out-of-town chains, and quick service, and which is also an interesting, again, a whole other subject we could open up, that we're trying to dabble in downstairs. You know, and I think that, you know, there's all these places opening up that have 300-500 seats, you know. You know, I just have 50 here, you know, come sit in my seats. You know, support, you know, it's all part of the, you know, let's eat local, let's support our local talent too. So that's what I would say to the diners and customers out there, you know, come. There's so many great chefs that are running beautiful independent restaurants, you know, that's what we need to support as a city. You know, and as far as people wanting to come into this industry, I think it can be so rewarding. Like, what a beautiful way to use your creativity. And I mean that in more sense, you know, for me as a chef, you know, obviously I have this sort of brain space creativity of like, what about this new flavor combination kind of side of it. But for me, something I've always appreciated since my days as a line cook is you're literally creating things every day. From a physical standpoint, like, I created this food for you. You know, someone else created the dish, but I created the food. And so being able to go to work and say like, oh, I made all these things today, and I put all these plates in the window, and I fed all these people, like, how rewarding, you know. It's
that
like,
is, right.
As opposed to, you know, people who know, oh, I'm working on this 6-month-long project right now. I'm just like, I can't even wrap my head around that in any way, shape, or form. Like, how you go to work and you're just like, oh, yeah, this will be done someday, you know, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. You know, and it's like, no, I like cook for people today, and then I like scrubbed some floors and did all this like physical things. You know, to me, it's like very like real and very It's very easy to explain what I do to people. Like, I cook food for a living.
It's very caring.
Everyone understands that. Like, I feed people. I cook food. You know, it's like, you know, that side of it is creativity, even if you're not, you know, inventing things. You're still creating things.
Sure.
So for me, that's a very, very rewarding piece of it. Like, every day you go home and say, okay, well, there were some things I didn't get to do today that I really wanted to do, but I did feed all these people, and I did, you know, nurture all these cooks, and I did, you know, whatever, provide, you know, as an owner now, I provided a livelihood for all these people.
That's amazing.
You know, so, you know, I think that it is a really great industry, and I think it's something that I've always appreciated about it is that, you know, not that I've settled in Boston now, I think, for this point in my life, but I have explored looking at other things, and you know, it's been something in the back of my head, certainly when I was younger, that it's like, oh, I can just move wherever I want, and there's always restaurants, there's always cooks jobs. You know, maybe it's not exactly, you know, what I would do if I had all the choices in the world, but, you know, having that in your back pocket and saying like, oh, I could move to any city and find a job, was very sort of liberating. It's like, okay, but I'm choosing to live here, I'm doing this, or, you know, I could go on a cruise boat, or I could.
That's an amazing perspective.
Yeah, so for me that was always kind of a nice, you know, this is a really good skill set that I could take anywhere I wanted, you know, whereas if it was like a tech job or something, it's like, yeah, you can sort of do that everywhere, but different than some other professions. So.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you for your generosity of time and knowledge, and it's been an amazing conversation. So I definitely encourage anyone to either visit here, Mooncusser Fish House, or 80 Thoreau in Concord, and you won't be disappointed. Thanks again.
Yeah, it was really great talking to you.